And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen, standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter at the time they matter. Here at CR Podcast, your host, Daniel Horowitz, back here on this fine Tuesday. And I want to distill the issues we talked about yesterday with immigration, judicial supremacism. I want to distill Trump's legacy into the following two questions. Will Trump put down the street insurrection? And will he put down the judicial insurrection against our duly passed immigration laws? It's that simple. Obviously, we know on inflation, economy, it's complex. We know the GOP is not going to do anything. But the reality is that right now, if you look at the polling, immigration is still or at least immigration enforcement is still popular in even blue states among your swing voters. People want to see success. They want to see implementation. They want to see the chaos ended. And the way to do it is to finally invoke the Insurrection Act and have zero tolerance. All of the statutes that were used against people that were within eyeshot of the Capitol on January 6th, why are they not being used endlessly against these people that are openly plotting not just to protest or riot? I mean, you could protest, you can't riot, but we're not even talking about rioting. We're talking about premeditated thwarting of ICE, attacking and targeting ICE, trying to grind down the official duties of law enforcement, which violate multiple federal statutes, general ones, immigration as well. And then what needs to be done on immigration law to finally pass through Congress. Trump has never passed an immigration bill. It's amazing if you think about it. He's on his second term. He has never gotten a single immigration bill passed through. That was his signature issue. That needs to change. He needs to demand that, make it clear this is what he wants, demand they pass it, demand that they enforce it, and make it clear that he will enforce the jurisdiction stripping provisions that prevent the judiciary from hearing these cases. Frankly, they're already largely in law. This is just to put an exclamation mark on it. So either crush the blue state insurgency or create your own autonomous red state zone where you do the same. So either, crush these insurgents against ICE, promoting, shielding, harboring illegal aliens, or leave it alone and create a permanent legal and political structure in red states that we could get rid of illegal aliens even under a Democrat president. One or the other. The problem is right now the president is doing neither. He hasn't invoked the Insurrection Act to put down the street violence and the street really revolution, attacks on federal law enforcement. And at the same time, he's done nothing to codify any of these executive policies. Refugees, temporary protected status, shut off from the Middle East immigration, all this stuff, foreign workers. And then obviously that the courts cannot review and litigate an invasion for illegal aliens. And none of that's been done. Codifying the rights of red states to block them, that hasn't been done. And I'm here to tell you that the opposite is actually taking place. We're going to have a special guest, George Fishman, who was really the lead author as a committee staffer in 1996 for the very immigration laws that were meant to prevent this. And he served in Trump's first administration at DHS. So we'll talk to him about all this stuff. But I got to just give you an update on what's happening in Congress. So as I predicted, the president twisted the arms not of the rhinos, but of the conservatives yesterday to agree to allow Democrats to have a clean shot at hijacking DHS with no collateral damage. This is the equivalent of Democrats trying to get a clean shot at DHS, but there's a hostage that they like in the way, and Trump urged conservatives to move the hostage out of the way so now Democrats could cleanly fight DHS and ICE funding and policies without any collateral damage. This is what they did by agreeing to pass all of the other department funding bills. By the way, record levels of funding in places like HUD. The Democrats love it. They've praised it. And then DHS, they're just going to do for 2 weeks. So now they get to come back in 2 weeks and block DHS without the collateral damage of a government shutdown. I have never seen such a self-immolation budget policy in my entire career following budget fights in Congress for the last 20 years. I've never seen anything like that. That you will literally fight your own side to preemptively give the Democrats a clean isolation of DHS funding. So that in itself is a big story. I don't understand what the plan is, because Democrats are now going in 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, next Friday, they're just going to block DHS funding unless they get, whatever they want. But the reality is the DHS bill as written, even in its current form, is bad. We should be getting more. Remember, this is the bill that doubles H-2B visas. This is the bill that has UAC amnesty in it for those that traffic the children. It does not defund sanctuary cities. It does not defund court cases on removals. So what's the point? You're not going to hear this anywhere else today, that we just gave Democrats a cudgel to negotiate down a bill that was already insufficient. So you might be hearing news today that, conservatives got something in return. Not from Democrats, but from Trump and possibly Senate Majority Leader Thune, but it's a question. And that is, okay, but we're going to get the SAVE Act passed. But what do you mean? You're giving up your leverage on the must-pass budget bills on condition that somehow they're going to pass a standalone bill, the SAVE Act, which would basically create a national standard for voter ID and non-citizen, preventing non-citizens from voting. And that's a standalone bill. So how are you going to get that passed? So now there's grumbling, and it's unclear whether Thune agreed, but that he's going to enforce a talking filibuster. So just real briefly, for those that don't understand, before 1917 or so, we always had, there was no 60 vote threshold. It takes 51 to pass something in the Senate, albeit you could filibuster by holding the floor and preventing a vote. But you can't hold the floor forever. It could last for a day. But eventually, they'll get in there and force the vote, and the vote is with 51. But because they wanted more efficiency in the Senate, and before we were quite as polarized, they basically said, all right, if you object to it, so we don't sit and drag out a talking filibuster, we're going to not bring up the bill unless we have 60 votes to invoke cloture to break the filibuster. So basically now you have just a virtual filibuster that de facto you always need 60 votes. But if you were to force a talking filibuster, you can get it through. So they're promising to do that with the SAVE Act. Now, look, I support that. I've talked about this for years, that it's a good compromise between, just straight up 51 majority rule versus always needing 60. So basically, it allows the minority the ability to grind things down, but ultimately they can't block every last thing. If they keep doing it, it will slow down the calendar. Inevitably, you'll lose time and ability to pass maybe everything you want, but inevitably, the 2, 3, 4 things you really want passed, you're going to utilize the time to force that through. But here's the question on that. If suddenly we have this stratagem to go ahead and get one of our highly supported bills passed with 51 votes, then why the hell haven't we done this for the past 13 months on any other issue? And why am I not hearing a plan to do it going forward? I mean, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I support voter ID. I support verification of proof of citizenship to vote. But folks, let's be honest here. What is the bigger problem? That we have endless streams of a million third world immigrants and foreign workers every year, or foreigners voting? Okay, what is the bigger problem? The broader judicial reform need, the immigration moratorium, or voter fraud? Now, I know my colleagues will say everything's voter fraud. They will have you believe that if Republicans lose in the midterms big, it's all because of voter fraud. Now, it's a looming problem. We do have a lot of very close elections, and it's a big problem for that. I certainly support this. But at the end of the day, the fundamental reason why Republicans are going to get crushed is for two reasons. Number one, Democrats have a high floor of automatic support because of immigration, because of the decline of religion in the country, the decline of education, the decline of values. And number two, the Republican Party sucks. If you want to know the bigger voter fraud problem, it's not the lack of photo ID. It's the Republican Party that campaigns on our issues, lies, gets in there, subverts our issues, ensures that none of our things pass, helps the Democrats with all their stuff, like they're doing with this DHS funding bill, and then they turn around and dangle in front of you a little shiny object. That, my friends, is the biggest voter fraud that we need to deal with. So I would rather call out that fraud and force them to vote and force a talking filibuster on defunding sanctuary cities, defunding judicial review of all immigration cases, having an immigration moratorium, codifying all these executive orders on TPS, refugee, asylum, jurisdiction stripping. Obviously, foreign worker moratorium should be in there, but Trump doesn't support it. Foreign student moratorium, all that stuff needs to be in there, because right now you're suffering all the liabilities. You may as well get the benefits. And you know what? If you did that, things would actually be better. Let me show you this. Ryan Gerdusky put this out on Twitter. There's a Siena University poll of New York State. So again, we don't need to win New York. We're never going to win New York. But you would think, oh my gosh, everyone wants to defund ICE, right? Well, actually, this is a blue state. Do you support or oppose deporting immigrants living illegally in the U.S.? Okay, straight up question, not a loaded question, very straightforward. It's above water 43-35 in the state of New York. Among Indies, it's plus 10. Okay? Among white voters, it's plus 13. Even among Black and Latino voters, it's slightly above water. So you could certainly extrapolate how much more so you're going to see that in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Georgia, in Arizona. Okay? But at the same time, there's a Harvard-Harris poll that has Democrats up 28 points on the generic ballot with independents. By the way, in 2018, when they got crushed, they won independents by 15. So this is 28, almost double. That's how disastrous it is. So the issue is not unpopular. It's Trump and Republicans making it unpopular by being stupid, all their unpopular economic stuff. No narrative, no accomplishments. It's all a game. That's the bigger fraud. So don't dangle in front of me, oh, we're going to have a standalone vote, even if you get it signed into law on preventing voter fraud. Oh, but then we're going to give Democrats a clean shot to block DHS funding, and we're never going to push to use the same process to codify anything that needs to be done on all these executive orders, immigration certainly, but other issues as well. And this is the thing. Notice everything is someone else's fault. It's always a process. Oh, there's voter fraud. Oh, the districts aren't drawn properly. We need to redistrict. How about you redraw the freaking GOP? How about you elect better people in primaries, or better yet, get a new party altogether, because the Republican Party sucks. It's terrible. That's the real voter fraud there. Yeah, I mean, there's problems with districts, there's problems with voter fraud, but the fundamental fraud is the GOP itself that not only is against us, but what's worse is they run on our issues, and then that prevents other people from coming up and legitimately dealing with it. So now we're disenfranchised. We'd be better off without the GOP. You know what the GOP is like? I'll tell you what the GOP is like. The Democrats are the person arsoning the House. Now, eventually, people are going to be outraged at this dastardly deed, and they're going to come and mobilize forces to get in there and get rid of that guy and, put out the fire, come in with trucks and hoses and put out the fire. What the GOP is that fat rear end sitting in front of the door of that house, blocking you from getting in to put out that fire because they're supposedly there to police it, but they're actually turning around and enforcing strategically what the arsonist is doing. So now you don't have the ability to ever redress it. That, my friends, is the GOP fraud for you. And look, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of doing nothing on this. By the way, with the districts, it's pathetic. So Maryland, the Maryland House just passed an 8-0 map to obliterate the one GOP district they have. In Virginia, they're on their way to taking the 4-district Republican. So Republicans have 4 districts, and they're on their way to taking it down to 1 district, and they'll be left with nothing. And so they're not even going to win on that gambit. And by the way, the Democrats are going to do so well in this election that they're going to be able to hold all of their extended districts. Whereas Republicans, their whole map is going to collapse in places like Texas. This is the bigger problem. I'm sick of these shiny objects. We need to deal with the fundamentals. Put down the insurrection and then put down the judicial supremacy and maybe try to codify the other executive orders and other policies while you're at it. It's sink or swim at this point. That's all it is. So let's get into this with our special guest. First, make sure you like and subscribe Horowitz Show on YouTube, and also subscribe to our Substack here at in the corner. You could tap your phone, those of you watching, to the QR code of Daniel Horowitz at Substack. So, folks, the gulf between January 6th, which was a one-day event, and an ongoing 12-month, not just riot, but insurrection designed to thwart official immigration enforcement and proceedings, which is one of the clearest authorities of a national government. The gap is enormous. So what we saw with January 6th was it was treated like an insurrection. The judges treated it as such, so they gave all these enhancements. Anyone who was caught, and I'm not kidding you, there's actually a case, Vicky White from Minnesota, ironically, where essentially she was hit up with Section 274, or I'm sorry, 8 USC at 111, assaulting an officer because her face interfered with the fist of an officer. You had 18 USC 231A3, any act that interferes, obstructs, impedes law enforcement responding to civil disorder. Non-stop, people were hit up 5, 10-year minimums, held without bail. And yet here we now know you have goon squads that are doing ICE watch. You have checkpoints that are being set up by civilians, but they're kind of under the color of law because law enforcement locally is allowing that to happen, and hunting down ICE, literally physically preventing, premeditated. Again, this is not a one-day Gettysburg-style chaos that no one really expected to happen, both the police officers and the people at the Capitol. We're talking about officials directly saying they're going to obstruct. In addition to obstructing law enforcement, we have a statute 1324 in the INA about shielding, harboring, concealing illegal immigrants. This is openly their goal. Whatever happened to that? So if Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, it will make it so much easier that to now deal with this, because now everything you're doing is an insurrection. It's impeding, and it doesn't look like, oh, a sympathetic shooting that it looks like it wasn't a clean shot, because ICE is put in an impossible situation now where Antifa pushes people in front of them, and it's very volatile. They're getting harmed, but then inevitably someone's going to shoot. Maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe it was too quick, but the totality of circumstance is different. The Insurrection Act is designed to deal with that totality of circumstance. George H.W. Bush invoked this pretty early on when that was just a riot. I mean, it wasn't a matter of obstructing something. They were rioting. They were upset about it. This is literally to obstruct. I don't understand how this has gone on. The other thing I don't understand is how we've gone 13 months, and really you add Trump's first term to this, 5 years, where every time it says in law that a court can't hear a case, or every time it says in the law that someone is not entitled to remain here, a judge says, screw that, it's immoral. I don't believe in it. Just yesterday, despite what the Supreme Court said about TPS, and despite a statute saying that they cannot hear TPS cases, at least a district judge, it's like, screw it. Well, we're hearing the case on how you're doing it, so we're going to do it anyway. Here's an injunction. At some point, we have to have a plan. The fact that we haven't passed new laws, and it's not just passing a law, you have to then emphatically make it clear you will enforce them. And you will not, like any other law, you have to enforce jurisdiction stripping. As Justice Thomas said, Congress has that authority just like they do to coin money. And if a judge is like, screw it, I'm going to hear the case anyway, well, then the executive branch has to enforce that. I was thinking, we talked about this a lot yesterday, and I wanted to bring on someone who was really doing this from day one, who actually was involved in writing some of these statutes in 1996. We've had George Fishman on before, but he's with us today. He serves as senior legal fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. He served on the House Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Immigration for decades. The chief counsel there. He served as acting chief counsel for USCIS at DHS under Trump 1, and now he's back at our friends at CIS, and he's with us today. Hey, George, you heard my filibuster there. I want to, first of all, welcome to the Blaze. I want to get your take on this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. You just wrote this piece. I got to get straight to it on the need and the benefit to invoking the Insurrection Act. Give us a background of what this act is and how it would help to deal with this circumstance.
Sure. The Insurrection Act has been around in various forms for centuries. It has been used. It was one of the key mechanisms used by President Eisenhower, President Johnson, President Kennedy to protect civil rights marchers against attacks. It was used to protect Chinese immigrants, minors, well over 100 years ago, against riots, against violent riots. It is a key mechanism to, when the federal law cannot be enforced because of insurrection, because of rebellion, because of unlawful combinations. And we're talking everything from the Whiskey Rebellion, when it was used by President George Washington, to some of the big labor strikes at the end of the 19th century, when federal forces were used to protect the ability to deliver the mails in Chicago. The Supreme Court has been very clear about what situations would allow for the use of federal forces, U.S. military, and in my view, enforcement of the immigration laws, given the insurrection or near insurrection by private individuals, maybe even by state and local officials, justify the use of the Insurrection Act. I have long advocated that it be used as a force multiplier for DHS to carry out large-scale deportations. You have 6,000 DHS officers. You have 10, 15 million unlawful aliens, illegal aliens in the country, though the number has certainly dropped dramatically since President Trump took over. But that force multiplier, in my view, would be essential to actually carrying out mass deportations of removable aliens. But in addition, and I have a piece coming out on this soon, because of the sort of attacks on ICE and Border Patrol officials in Minnesota and elsewhere, the violent attacks, as you very well pointed out, the coordinated efforts to prevent and impede the enforcement of immigration law, in my view, the Insurrection Act can also be used so federal forces, military forces, can be used to protect DHS, ICE, CBP officers so they can carry out their duties without fear of a violent attack, of being rammed by SUVs, of having fireworks thrown directly at them, rocks thrown directly at them. So I think there should be real consideration of using the Insurrection Act now. The Freedom Caucus, the board of directors of the Freedom Caucus in the House, came out indicating that's one of the steps President Trump should use. I would certainly highly recommend that President Trump consider invoking the Insurrection Act. And, certainly he's mentioned it as a possibility. I think now might be one of those situations where it's really needed.
No, absolutely. And it's funny, all the historical references you made, none of them, in my view, measure up to the severity and the rationale here, where it's so ubiquitous. It's been going on so long. It's getting worse. ICE was targeted for assassination multiple times, including in Dallas, where there was a shooting of a police officer in the neck because of it. You have them now going around, and it's not like, okay, you have a protest in a stadium or in a park with a permit, which you have the constitutional right to do. It's that they're literally targeting and blocking the operation itself. And then so right now, ICE has this PR problem, which I think is exaggerated if you look at the polling, but where Antifa will shove people in front of them that seemingly look innocuous or unarmed, but they are impeding the operation. And then because of just the volatility of the circumstance, a certain percentage, you're going to have a violent interaction. And then they run with that and riot off of that. Then the judges respond to that because the judges are involved sentimentally with it. The street and judicial insurgency are working in tandem. And I want to get to that second half. So describe to us what authorities this will allow if once we invoke that, if ICE is coming down the street and then now you have, the Antifa guys trying to block them, what would this do?
Well, let me be clear. Even if the Insurrection Act is invoked by the president and the president sends active duty military, sends National Guard under the Insurrection Act, for instance, to protect DHS officers from attack, to enable them to do their jobs, the military is bound by the same constitutional constraints on the use of force as a police officer is. They can't, simply invoking the Insurrection Act doesn't give anyone the power to do anything a local police officer wouldn't have the right to do right now. They're bound by the same constitutional and statutory constraints. But as you indicated, the law is being impeded. The purpose is to make it impossible or nearly impossible to enforce duly enacted federal law. There are multiple federal criminal statutes that are being violated. And these people need to be arrested. If they're violating federal law, impeding federal law enforcement, they need to be arrested and tried. The military has to protect, if necessary, can be used to protect officers from violent attack.
So when you look at everything that's happening now, again, the gulf between this and January 6th is amazing, because everything that the judges said about January 6th applies to this times a million, because it's ongoing for 12 months. It's premeditated, it's planned. Um 18 USC 231A3. So any act that interferes or impedes law enforcement responding to civil disorder, that was applied to J6ers for mere presence, because they said that their presence added to the disruption. This is literally what the judges did. Judge Cotelli of the DC district, she called it the raindrop theory, where every person was a drop of rain that made the storm. That was a 5-year felony. There's a lot of this stuff going on here. And I don't mean that you have to apply it in a sort of tyrannical way. I mean that prima facie, they're trying to block. They're not just, people that were there for a little bit of a MAGA Woodstock, which was a lot of them. They're not there for a MAGA Woodstock when they're on the streets at an actual operation. That's a different thing. That's not the Capitol. That's not the White House. It's not a landmark. We know what's going on there. What are some of the authorities that need to be used?
Well, I think you've mentioned a few of the very important ones. That the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's a federal crime to shield, to harbor, to conceal, and someone who's in the U.S. that is in the U.S. illegally. And I've actually written that possibly officials of the Minneapolis school district are guilty of these crimes, because they admit publicly their whole goal in closing the Minneapolis schools, or if not closing them long term, allowing students to go back to virtual learning, was so that they could hide from DHS. If they or say their family were here illegally. That seems to me a clear case of purposeful action by officials to shield illegal aliens. That's a federal crime. So that's just one example. That's an immigration specific example. But as you've pointed out, there are also general statutes in the U.S. Code in Title 18 regarding impeding, interfering, threatening federal law enforcement officials in the carrying out of their duties. Those are also federal crimes, and those should also be prosecuted. Very interestingly, though, I guess a lot of these prosecutions might take place in Minnesota, where obviously tensions are very high. The Supreme Court in the Debs decision regarding the labor unrest and the use of the military to allow for the delivery of the mail during a general strike in Chicago, said, look, we can't just rely on prosecutions if we're in a state where to some extent there's such antipathy toward the federal government that no one's going to be convicted. That's a case for anarchy. In that case, the use of federal forces to ensure, in that case, the delivery of the mail. And I would think enforcement of our immigration laws is just as much a constitutional duty of Congress as the delivery of the mails. They're both specifically set forth as the responsibility of Congress, of the federal government in the Constitution, that the military can be used to make sure the law can be enforced, even in instances where tainted juries are not going to convict. That was the Supreme Court. That's not just me talking. That was the Supreme Court talking.
Yeah, and I don't understand this because, again, enormous oceans of precedent were set in the last 4 years following January 6th. Assaulting an officer, so 8 USC 111 was a big one, where J6ers were charged with aiding and abetting. So obviously we're not talking about people like directly hitting officers, but people were charged anywhere within 25 feet of aiding and abetting an assault if they could find one that took place. That was a 10-year felony. And then therefore anything you were holding, so rubber cones, costume props, they were considered weapons. I mean, this is what happened. And they were very open about it. And I don't understand how this has gone on for over a year now. And the response seems very lethargic, whether it's executive, whether it's codifying it in Congress. Every time people like Chip Roy want to codify some of this stuff, or you mentioned, with the whether it's jurisdiction stripping, the Insurrection Act, it just, I don't know. I'm not understanding what the play is. I mean, I know you're here for legal stuff, but politically, I feel like we're in the worst of all, that you're signaling that you're getting tough. You're kind of embarking on these missions, but you're setting them up to fail.
First I should note that it hasn't just been a year. When I was at DHS in President Trump's first term, there were these same sort of attacks against DHS, ICE in Portland, many other places in the country. So this is sort of just a expansion of what was already going on from 2017 to 2020. It's as you indicated, and it's been a coordinated, well-funded effort to impede enforcement of the immigration laws. And I think someone has just come out recently. I think there was an article in the Atlantic saying, "Hey, why can't we impede federal law? It's just like impeding the fugitive slave laws." That's the sort of analysis they make. It's on the other hand, it's sort of funny that Minnesota and and Minneapolis are actually claiming in federal court documents they've been invaded by federal law enforcement officers. The last time that argument was used, George Wallace, 1964, in attacking the civil rights laws, federal troops, are invading Alabama. It's the same rhetoric that was used by the segregationists in the darkest days of the civil rights effort. These people have no shame.
No, and that's why I don't understand. Everyone's focused on this after the shooting the last couple of weeks, but this has been going on all year. And as you mentioned, it really was going on in the first term. I think then the focus was we were still trying to shut down the border and weren't really succeeding until the end on that. So now the border's taken care of, but on interior, they're putting all their efforts into this. And again, this is not even a riot. This is a orchestrated triangle between the street thugs of the Democrat Party, the Democrat politicians, and the judges. Before we get to the judges and the laws, I just want to play for our listeners, those of you who are listening and not watching. So this is a video from Jorge Ventura. It's one of several people who have been on the ground just filming what Antifa is doing. They yesterday, and they were doing this before, but yesterday they were blatantly setting up checkpoints they were pulling people over and asking them if they're ICE. Let's watch about a minute of this.
Somalian Uber driver, man.
Hey, how's it going?
You said his license plates are ICE?
Doing good, yeah. I was just saying, it looks like in our system, your plates came up as an ICE plate. That doesn't seem like it's the case, but I just wanted to come through and see what was up and talk to you, see how you were doing. Okay, I figured, yeah.
I mean, he's clearly Somalian.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, well, glad to hear it. What's your name? Ali? Ali, nice.
How long have you guys been out here today? Are we good though?
Yeah, we're good.
I do want to ask, what's the system you guys are using out here? I mean, because it's obvious that was wrong, right? I mean, the guy was just a Somalian Uber driver, not ICE.
Well, the thing is, ICE, they're renting a lot of cars, but yeah, we'll take this off the list.
I mean, this is not just one example. They literally have neo-Confederate control of their areas where clearly the local Democrat politicians are winking and nodding on that. And the judges, rather than calling these people insurrectionists and putting enhancements, they're going after the administration. They're writing these screeds. I don't know. Isn't that straight up a violation, all this stuff, of a bunch of things, but certainly Section 274 of the INA, 8 U.S.C. 1324, shielding, harboring, concealing?
I think in many cases, and possibly that one, I think there should be real consideration of prosecution for federal criminal acts of impeding federal criminal investigations, federal civil law enforcement investigations. I should be clear that whenever there is a use of deadly force by federal officials, there needs to be a fair, full investigation. But that being said, I think the worst thing in the world to do would be for the administration to end large-scale immigration enforcement in Minnesota. That would just give encouragement to people everywhere who are essentially, as you said, acting in a neo-Confederate fashion to say, we don't like this federal law. Federal law is not going to apply here. Sort of in a large sense, what happened in Seattle until a black teenager was killed because the mayor of Seattle had sort of given up to the mob, entire city blocks, not even allowing police to go into there. And that kept on going until it eventually resulted in tragedy because there was no law enforcement. This is just a larger manifestation of that. And we really can't give into it. As I quoted in my piece on the Freedom Caucus, there was a very good federal court opinion in the 1930s basically saying, yeah, we can go back to calm and peace if we give up to the rioters, if we give up to the insurrectionists, do whatever they want. Yeah, I guess in a certain sense, we'll buy some peace by throwing the rule of law out the window. Let's tell, if people stay in your houses so you can't be mugged. It's your fault for getting mugged. You go out of your house. We can't give in to the insurrectionists. We can't give in to those who want to defeat enforcement of federal law. If they want to seek to change federal law, they can attempt that through the ballot box. As long as it's federal law, it needs to be enforced. The president needs to under the Constitution, needs to faithfully execute the laws of the United States. And again, if people don't like those laws, they can try to change them.
So that leads me to the final part of this, which is the judicial stuff. So you have to enforce federal law. Well, if you don't like it, change it at the ballot box. But we now have a system in this country that, in my view, just putting immigration aside, where we said was the one issue that was not supposed to have judicial oversight because when you're not dealing with U.S. citizens and you're not dealing with an attempt to permanently lock them up and punish them, but just to repatriate them to their home country, that was not supposed to be a criminal proceeding that required due process. And courts were not supposed to have this oversight. But over time, we were seeing these issues where we're litigating an invasion, where you can't litigate your way out of an invasion. So you were involved in crafting IRA in 1996, which, created expedited removal, short-circuited judicial review for a lot of this stuff. And to me, I was very young at the time, but from what I remember, that was designed as part of the agenda items of the contract with America, but Bill Clinton did sign it into law to prevent what we're seeing today, where every single policy that's black and white, really the intent of all these laws, you're not allowed to enforce anymore. And then even when the Supreme Court gives you a victory, so they'll just say, well, this is a slightly different case. Well, the Supreme Court ruled on TPS for Venezuela. Oh, well, now a judge says, Judge Reyes, even though there's no judicial review of any determination of the Attorney General with respect to the designation, termination, or extension of the designation of TPS. But you know what? I'm going to do it anyway, and I'm going to put an injunction on it. I don't like what ICE is doing. This is a young child. I don't think this guy committed a crime. I think this is immoral. I think we're at a grave point in our history. So therefore, this is what we're doing. George, 30 years later, what do we do about this? Are there better laws we could write? Is it a matter of just saying no? If you were in Congress, what would you do?
Well, first, let me say that there are bright spots. And one of the bright spots is the Supreme Court's so-called shadow docket, in which, because the Supreme Court decides so few cases every term, it has been staying some of these decisions, not saying, who wins, who loses, but this injunction against DHS is going to be stayed. It's going to be stayed until the case goes through the normal process in the appeals court. And if one side wants to seek certiorari at the Supreme Court, and we grant it, until we take a look at it. So we're not making an ultimate decision now because that takes so long and we do so few cases, but the injunction is not going to stand until there is a final decision. And that has been used a fair number of times by the Supreme Court to, for instance, as you mentioned, to allow TPS terminations to go through. And that is definitely a bright spot, the ability to shut down these injunctions without using one of the very few slots of full-scale consideration that the Supreme Court has available each year. But in addition, for every buffoonish decision by a federal district court, such as the one you just mentioned, and I should note that my colleague Andrew Arthur has a wonderful piece on that buffoonish decision at the Center for Immigration Studies yesterday or today. It got published. There are also some very encouraging decisions by judges nominated by President Biden. A federal judge, district court judge in Minnesota, threw out, just totally laughed out of court just a few days ago, a lawsuit by the state of Minnesota, a lawsuit by the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, basically demanding that the federal government shut down its Operation Metro Surge law enforcement operation in Minnesota, enjoin the enforcement of federal law in Minnesota on really
I know, but George,
wacky grounds that it was violating the 10th Amendment, et cetera. This Biden judge threw it out.
But they do that on purpose. They'll do a level. There's 10 levels beyond statute. Then they'll do the 12th that looks crazy. So then they secure the first 10. We're barely deporting people relative to the magnitude of the problem, and this is we're on the clock because Democrats are going to come back in. If Trump were there forever, that would be one thing. My point is, we can't litigate out of an invasion like this. What sort of updates need to be done? So, for example, they're talking about forcing the talking filibuster to pass the SAVE Act, which is a little bit more on the voter side. Fine, that's great. But my point is, then that process should be used for that whole bucket list of EOs that need to be codified so that when Democrats come back in, we don't get left with what all the good work you did in the first term going out the window just like that on the first day a Democrat comes back in. What sort of stuff do we need to do that you feel will be force multiplying statutes that A, will really accelerate removals, and B, make them at least as much as we can more enduring?
Well, I think there's definitely things that can be done. I had the honor of working for House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte, whose legislation in 2018 would have done a large number of those things. But a word of caution: when I started in Congress as a staff member on immigration in 1995, if I knew how difficult it was to get meaningful immigration legislation enacted, even when your party had majorities in both houses, I'm not sure I ever would have gotten into this racket.
But we never had
exceeding-
Trump as president, who supposedly supports this.
Well, I mean, one problem is the extinction of the Blue Dog Democrats. That 1996 immigration legislation, which you mentioned, which was one of the first things I worked on, a majority of Democrats in the House of Representatives supported that at one point, voted for it. Shift to 2005, when Jim Sensenbrenner, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, had equally powerful immigration enforcement legislation. It passed the House, but only 18% of Democrats voted for it. Go to 2018, when Chairman Goodlatte, equally powerful immigration enforcement legislation, 0 Democrats voted for it. It failed on the House floor because 0 Democrats voted for it, and because there are always going to be a certain number of Republicans beholden to employer interests, cheap labor, being able to keep their illegal alien workers, that the bill failed on the House floor in a Republican-controlled House. So, and now where we have such a one vote margin, Republicans do in the House of Representatives, I am not sanguine that meaningful legislation can get passed, even in the House. In terms of the filibuster in the Senate, that's a double-edged sword. Certainly, there have been many cases that, as I remember when I was in Congress, that bad stuff would have gotten through Congress had it not been for the filibuster. So, it's something where, when you're in the majority, a party's in the majority and is being hindered in the Senate because they can't get 60 votes, that's a great incentive to get rid of the filibuster. But once you're in the minority, that's the most powerful weapon you have. But, putting those things aside, the sort of legislation, the sort of provisions that were in H.R. 2 that passed the House of Representatives last Congress, the sort of things that were in Mr. Sensenbrenner's legislation, that were in Mr. Goodlatte's legislation, reforming the asylum laws. So that can't be used to endlessly enable people to remain in the United States, to enact mandatory e-verify, so that it becomes much more difficult for illegal alien employees to work. And I think a lot of the self-deportations that have taken place in the Trump administration, it was of course illegal aliens leaving on their own because they saw the writing on the wall. It was becoming increasingly difficult to openly and comfortably live illegally in the United States. So anything, and especially given the Supreme Court has said for over 100 years, deportation proceedings, there's a certain element of due process that has to be met. I'm not sure it would be the high watermark of officially removing under orders of removal aliens within the interior of the United States. I'm not talking about people apprehended at the border. Within the interior of the United States, the high watermark was about 240,000 in a year, and that was under the administration of Barack Obama.
Yep, first term.
We have a backlog. It's dropped somewhat, but over 3 million cases in immigration court. I'm not necessarily sure it is feasible to go through the normal removal process under Title VIII and remove millions of people. No. It's just logistically, I'm not sure it's possible. So anything that can be done, certainly when Title 42 was,
live here
was around, you didn't have to go through that process.
Exactly. You cannot litigate your way out of an invasion, so that process needs to change. But then also, like you're saying, with the demagnetization, if you can't get a job here, and this is kind of a point of contention within the administration now, That's really what you need to go after. And I want to land the plane with this issue: state-based enforcement, like you're seeing in Florida. To me, if we're going to have neo-Confederates where they thwart immigration law and largely get away with it, the sanctuary cities, the courts have ruled for them and say, well, they could go and ignore detainers. Well, then at a minimum, we should be able to codify that states could fully demagnetize, fully enforce, fully criminalize illegal presence. But unfortunately, we're having anarcho-tyranny where the blue states could thwart and the red states, all the ones that tried to criminalize illegal presence at a state level, it's enjoined in the courts. So I think, isn't that something that we need to, if we had one or two bullets to fire, I know you're skeptical that we could pass that, to codify state-based enforcement?
Well, we have to operate within the confines of the Supreme Court's Arizona versus U.S. decision from a decade or so ago, which is going to make it difficult for states to, on their own, enforce immigration law against the will of a particular administration or a particular Congress, but because of federal preemption. But when you do have a sympathetic administration and a sympathetic Congress, and the states and localities are operating in coordination with the administration, there is a vast amount they can do. And I think the Trump administration is encouraging them to do it. But for instance, determinations of who is here illegally going to have to be done by the DHS. Can't be done by local officials. But with a sympathetic administration, that can all be well handled. And I would certainly, I know they are, but that the administration uses state and local officials in the 287G process, but even without 287G, as force multipliers in enforcing immigration law. And one of the things that needs to be settled by the Supreme Court is, and this was a provisions from the 1996 Insurrection Act, it is unlawful for states, localities to forbid their police departments, their officials, their officers from providing necessary information to DHS about illegal aliens they arrest, they encounter. The Supreme, that's been on the books for decades.
Yep.
And, it's had a mixed reaction in the federal courts. I think the Supreme Court needs to, and I hope this will come about through the Trump administration suing the city of Chicago over this very issue. Supreme Court needs to say there is no 10th Amendment violation with requiring states and localities to tell the federal government when they're going to release criminal aliens from detention so that DHS can pick them up. And when we get that ruling from the Supreme Court, which I hope will come, at the end of this litigation against Chicago, then it'll be explicitly clear these sanctuary jurisdictions and cities, they're not just being, free spirits. They're violating federal law.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that needs to be dealt with, right? And again, I mean, this is the problem, that we haven't passed new laws, didn't do it in the first term, and the ability to enforce them and desire to enforce them. But obviously this begins with the Insurrection Act. I appreciate what you've done, your work on this. I guess where people could find your work and your colleagues is all on the CIS blog. Comprehensive, pretty much everything about legal proceedings, immigration enforcement, foreign workers, it's all there.
Yeah, thanks so much. You can just go on the website and you can go by author, you can go by subject, you can go by what's most recent. And if you find an article or a blog you like, please go ahead.
Think about supporting CIS. CIS does good work. You have smart guys there. George, we're out of time, but thanks so much, really, for what you've done, and looking forward to speaking to you again. Take care. So again, folks, that was George Fishman. Worked in this business for a while. Obviously, I agree with him on the Insurrection Act. On the other stuff, it's more like, had we listened to him 30 years ago, we'd be in a better place. But now, 30 years later, you can't litigate your way out of an invasion. So you either have to say no, you have to pass new statutes, the states have to do it, but the status quo is not an option. Okay, that is not an option. We will not have a country. We won't even have states where we'll have sovereignty. But we gotta think out of the box, and we gotta get tougher on this, because we can't just wrap ourselves around the axle and have this one directional civil war where one side is bound to court cases that defy law, and the other side could defy law and court cases and get away with it. I mean, something's got to give. And I just want to get back to this filibuster thing again. I mean, people could have their views about the filibuster, about, well, do we need it when we're in the minority? But the point I'm just making, what's relevant for today's news, is I don't understand that we're being promised it's going to be enforced, or at least this talking filibuster, for this one thing of the SAVE Act with voting. Okay, then what about this other stuff? What about defunding court cases in sanctuary cities? At least, I get it that there's some rhinos out there, but Trump has never, in his 5 years as president, including when he had much larger majorities, said, this is the bill I want, the RAISE Act, all these other bills that he was talking about from Goodlatte in 2018. I want this and only this, and I'm going to use my bully pulpit, go after the individuals. Instead, he's making calls. Tom Cole, one of the appropriators, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, he was saying that Trump was making calls to the Freedom Caucus to get them to vote for this funding bill that will get Democrats to hijack DHS. So what I'm saying is, where there's a will, there's a way. I don't think we have the will, but I just want to give you guys this perspective. Let me know your thoughts on this interview and other things. Daniel Horowitz at startmail.com is the email. Till tomorrow, Micah 6:8. God bless you all, and thank you for listening.